Good evening, and thanks for joining me again to the second part of getting sick in prison. So I'm gonna jump a little ahead here because I was supposed to be going like day by day, taking you through the process of prison. So at this point in my bid, when coronavirus hits, I'm like a seasoned veteran in prison. I know what to expect. And I've actually mastered the routine of, that's one thing I'm a master at, is routine in prison. And my day in and day out, I was banging days out until coronavirus hit. It was the absolute worst time in prison for me ever. I actually thought at one point in time that killing myself was better than what was going on right there. Really, honest to God. It's the honest to God's truth. So how this whole thing happened, I'm sure you guys realize, what was going on in the street. It was like an apocalypse. So the same thing happened in prison. And what had happened first is there was an epidemic. We heard about an epidemic. We used to watch the news all the time. And then, one day, it went from epidemic to pandemic. And I was like, what's a pandemic? I was working out with this kid, Mike. And I was like, hey, what's a pandemic? What's the difference in a pandemic and an epidemic? And he started telling me a little about what was going on in the news, because I'm really not a big news guy per se in jail, So I remember a memorandum coming out from the administration saying that if this persisted, there might be changes to operations of the prison. That was the first indicator. My heart dropped all the way down to my feet. Because now what they did was, the first thing they did was there was adjoining units and the doors were open. You could go back and forth to the unit. They closed the doors. Now you couldn't move between units. That was the first indicator that something was up. And now everything takes a life on of its own. It takes another whole nother life on in prison. It's a whole different dynamic. When things like that start happening, everybody starts speculating. Just think, you don't have anything to do, right? There's a million guys just stuck in this one unit saying, oh, this is it. Oh, went from everything from they're going to let everybody out to they're going to kill everybody. That's what, that's it, ran that gamut. So I remember one day we're sitting in the TV room, and they're saying that they're not going to let inmates move the units are going to start getting locked down. Nobody can move. And we were like, yeah, they're not going to do that, are they? You think they would do that? So going back and forth. Then I seen the most insane thing I've ever seen in prison. I seen forklifts bringing bunk beds into a whole nother part of the prison. Looked like the visiting room. We're like, yo, they're bringing beds to the visiting room. Like, now we knew something was up. And from that day on, things started to change. People started to get sick. We heard, oh, they got A block locked down. There's people sick in A block. Now you were seeing stuff on the news. Now it was hitting right to where you were. So nobody knew, at this point in time in my life, I think yeah, it's the flu, you know what I'm saying? So I'm not really that concerned about it now. But when it first hit, they were like, people are dying. I remember seeing this jogger on CNN, and she was on the brink of death. But she had come back, and that was her story on CNN. And I was like, what? You know what I mean? So now everything is locked down now. Now they were letting some units go out, but now one unit got sick, now another unit. Then you started hearing people coughing in my unit. Started people getting sick, but the thing is nobody would say they had it. I remember, because everybody was locked down now, right? So now everybody's in close proximity. We were playing poker one night. 7 guys at a table, touching cards, touching their face. It's a hotbed for anything. Forget about coronavirus, right? So we're sitting there playing cards. I get up, I go get something to eat. I step into the Spanish TV room. I'm watching a little bit of the Spanish news. And I'll never forget, I felt my ears getting hot. I felt really weird. I was like, what the? And at that very moment, that precise moment, I said, oh shit, I got this motherfucker. And I remember seeing that story. It's always the worst case scenario you'll see on the news, right? I remember seeing that jogger, and I'm like, oh shit, I got this thing. I got this motherfucker. And I remember my ears were tingling. I started to get hot, the chills. I was like, what the? And I remember that night going to bed. And I used to go to bed the same night, the same time all the time, wake up the same time in the morning. I remember I had to go to the bathroom 100 times. And my bunkie was up all night. He was doing all kinds of crazy shit. So he was like, yo, what's up with you? Like, you know what I'm saying? What's up? I said, nah, nobody would admit that they didn't feel good, because what happened is they were coming around. They'd start coming around doing people's temperatures. And if you had a temperature, they would pack all your shit and you'd go to that place where all them bunk beds were. It was a quarantine. They didn't know that they couldn't stop it. They just were doing what nobody knew right at that time. So picture how it was in jail. Now, what happened was, I knew I had it. I was sick. I didn't feel good. I was felt like shit. It was like unlike anything I've ever felt in my whole life. I felt my head buzzing. It was so weird. And I urinated about 10, 12 times that night. But I knew the next morning they'd be coming around with the thermometers. And if you had a fever, it was over for you. You were getting lugged. So I remember I stayed up that whole night and just pounded water, try to keep the fever down, pounded water, urinating, going back and forth, drinking, urinating. And I remember the next day they came around with the thermometers, and I was like, oh man. And I was taking I think Tylenol. They said, don't take Tylenol, but I didn't care. I took it because I knew it would get the fever down. So I passed that thermostat, to the thermometer test, and I didn't get lugged. But they lugged two guys next, 2 cubes over. And they were like, oh man, those are the first 2 people had it. And then everybody else was like, dummy up. Because the thing in jail is nobody wanted to lose their bed. Nobody wanted to lose their, you get lugged to the hole, it's like your whole life gets turned upside down. Now they want to lug you for not feeling good. I had been sick hundreds of times in prison, and nobody gave a fuck about it. Now I'm like, now I can't show nobody I'm sick. Then one day, I think it was probably about 3 or 4 days later, my friend's like, man, I think I got that shit. And I'm like, you got it, I got it. And then everybody's like, you got it? I fucking feel like shit, I got it. So the whole unit already had it, but nobody wanted to say anything, right? Now everybody started, after the time started elapsing, right? People are like, yo, I got it. And I'll be like, I got it. And then they're like, you got to fight through the fever so you don't get lugged. Because that was the only thing they were doing, was giving it the thermometer. If you had a fever, you were going. And now it was like trying to beat the thermometer every day. Crazy. And the worst result of that was, there was this guy, he was a black guy. He was like a military guy, was in the Marines, tough guy, you know what I'm saying? But nobody had seen him for a couple of days. And then one of the nurses went over there to give him a temperature, and he's on the brink of death. He didn't want to lose his bed. He didn't even get up, nothing. So they made him walk to the front of the unit. And this is the God's honest truth, that he walked to the door, passed out on the floor, and that was it. He died as a result of coronavirus at Elkton, Ohio. It was a low security institution. And looking back on it now, there was a place in Louisiana and Elkton, Ohio that got hit first and the worst. So I was in one of the worst prisons that got hit, and one of the first prisons, the feds, that got hit. Oakdale, Louisiana, because Rodney Myers was the warden over there, and he was a sweetheart. He was my case manager at Lee County Penitentiary, and I had a great rapport with him. And the BOP, that was the first institution to really get it, and a couple people died there, because when it first hit, it hit hard. I was sick for 3-4 months. I mean, for a month, all I drank was milk, banana, and strawberry shake, like, you know what I'm saying? I just made like a little shake. I remember I couldn't eat none. I had zero appetite. It was sick because I eat like an animal. So now at this point in time, everything was locked down. The whole jail had it. Right now they weren't even lugging people. Now it was just like, now it was just everybody sick in one institution. Then there was like medical emergencies. You would see like the little golf cart ambulances going, like you would say medical emergency, and G, medical emergency, and H, medical. They would just, for a week, they were just going around crazy. People were just passing out from this stuff. I forget the number. There was notable deaths, like in the teens. People died at Elkton, Ohio, in the teens. And there was like 30 or 40 people, and I'm just giving you a rough estimate. You can get the numbers for what happened during coronavirus at Elkton, Ohio federal prison. There's numbers, there's statistics definitely. And I remember them, but it's been so long now that I don't. But there was so many people at outside hospitals on ventilators from Elkton, Ohio, that they brought the National Guard into the prison to staff a hospital, and they brought everybody back from the outside hospitals because the people in the community needed the outside hospitals at the time. So they brought everybody back and had the National Guards staff a Unicor building that they made into a makeshift hospital. That's true, accurate, seen it with my own eyes, watched the National Guard. Now, they weren't doing anything with security in the institution. They weren't, becoming officers. They strictly staffed the hospital that was a Unicor building. And Unicor is a place where people go to work. It's the factory workers. So none of that was happening. Nothing was going on. They were delivering meals to the unit. And it wasn't so much of the worst time then. Afterwards became the worst time because it was a protracted period of not being able to go outside. I mean, the craziest thing in the feds is even if I was under investigation for violence in Leavenworth Penitentiary. There was a murder that happened in my unit, and you still got 1 hour of recreation from the whole. Guys that were under investigation for murder got 1 hour of recreation 5 days a week, universal throughout the system. And I had become so accustomed to that I was incensed when I couldn't go outside. I was like, we got to get 1 hour rec. I mean, we didn't do anything. These people are sick, and they're saying that the best thing to do is go outside. And they kept people in these units sick on top of each other because they didn't know what to do. I mean, to their defense, they were just listening to what people told them to do, right? And, looking back now, it was just ridiculous, and it was horrifying. I ended up getting a transfer to a minimum security camp. And the last time I went to a minimum security trip, I had a furlough. I would just go on my own. But this time, they made you wait in a unit, you know what I mean? And you were just in that unit until they started transfers again. And they waited like 3 months to start transfers again. So like for 90 days, you were just stuck in this unit. And then I remember you heard rumblings, they're going to start transfers again. But it was brutal because after they did start the transfers, I was locked in Oklahoma City. And the way they did it in Oklahoma City was during coronavirus, everybody had to wear a mask. You went from, if you wore a mask in prison, you get locked up. You can't wear a mask in prison. You got to see your face all the time. It was like 100 series serious shot. Wearing a mask in prison was a shot. You got in trouble for it. It was a disciplinary infraction. And then one day they said, if you don't wear a mask, It's a disciplinary infraction. They just changed the rules overnight to try to be in accord with the CDC, So, but it was the strangest, most craziest thing. And it was the worst time in my bid for me. Because I'm a guy that goes out all the time. I wanted air. I will say that, the warden of the institution at Elkton, before I did get transferred, I went and talked to him and I was like, hey, listen, and I seen him at Mainline at lunch. And I was like, man, I got to get outside. And he got me outside. He got me outside to clean up. So like for 3 hours a day, I was outside. So me personally, but 98% of the people didn't get. I got my friend a job, but that's because I had a rapport with the warden. I used to fucking, talk. I knew a million people that he knew in the system that had come up with him. And, he looked out for me. There was a compound officer at Elkton that looked out for me, told the warden, hey, get this guy out. He helps me out all the time. He, cleans up. He's a real good worker, so I had a little stroke there. You know what I'm saying? I had been in jail for about 24 years at the time. We used to have officers that made warden that used to call the warden there saying, hey, how's Bartolomeo, So I had a little stroke because I had so much time in. And, fast forward to getting transferred, so I leave Elkton, Ohio, finally get out of Elkton, Ohio. And I get to Oklahoma City where I'm getting transferred to Berlin Camp. When I make it to Berlin Camp, the light shines down on heaven for me. But that year of waiting and just being locked down took a tremendous toll on my mind. You know what I'm saying? Psychologically, it crushed me. As much as it could. I'm saying, I try to stay above every situation, but just you were locked in a room for no wrongdoing. You got treated like you killed somebody. And just because people were sick. And when I asked them for a rec, I said, listen, I just want an hour rec. They looked at me and went, rec? You can't go outside. Like, it was like you were in the twilight zone. You're asking, you're like murderers get 1 hour a rec a day. Death row, you get 1 hour a rec, 5 days a week. Multiple murderers. And they looked at me and they were like, go outside. You can't go outside. No. Never, ever. Until I talked to the psychologist, I was like, hey, I'm supposed to get an hour rec. She goes, no, nobody can leave. It was it was sickening. And what they did at Oklahoma City, which was brutal, they would give you blocks of cells. So you would be in a row of cells, right? And they would just take this random 5 number. You were cell number 5 in this random block of 5. And if anybody got sick in that random block of 5, you got set back until everybody tested negative. But the guy that had corona left 7 days later. They wouldn't let you leave. So indefinitely you were stuck there. And then people would say, oh, I don't feel good. I would be like, yo, bro, don't call the nurse. It's a fucking cold. You're going to get over it. Don't worry. You're not going to die from it. You know what I'm saying? And this is when, the virus had dissipated a little bit. And so they kept coming by to give these tests. Because if somebody tested positive in the unit, they test the whole block again. And then when they test the block, 2 or 3 people came positive. It's just a numbers game. You could never get away from it. The whole block ain't never going to test negative. So what happened is that they came by to test me again, and I was always negative. I was like, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start drinking the fucking toilet water so I can get this fucking thing and get the fuck out of here. I was mad. I was angry. I was upset, man. I was by myself. I was, and then some points in time, I was just like, man, this ain't never going to fucking end, man. This thing is going to be I'm never getting out of here. I felt like that gloom and doom, that it was never going to end. I had a 35-year sentence, and I took that, no problem. But coronavirus, when they started locking people up for nothing and just keeping you in a cell, man, that protracted amount of time and not knowing. That's the thing. If they give you a sentence, okay, listen, you're in the cell for 90 days, you start marking days off. You start banging out of work. 89, 88, but just not knowing. And here's the thing. You're going to go the next day, somebody tests positive. Boop, 30 more days you got to wait. I mean, listen, that was the biggest mind fuck I've ever experienced in my whole life. You know? And then finally got transferred from Elkton to Oklahoma City. And then from Oklahoma City, we got transferred, drove into an airport, and I remember, and this is the craziest thing in the whole world, because usually from Oklahoma City, you'll go to Brooklyn, then maybe you'll go to Wyatt, and then maybe a bus will come to Wyatt to take you to Berlin, New Hampshire. We landed in New Jersey, and buses took us from New Jersey all the way to Berlin nonstop. Unheard of, but a score. I would have drove 3 straight days just to get to the destination. I wouldn't have cared, because getting in these holdovers, and then you go through this over and over again, and then Brooklyn, your whole life can change in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is the absolute, I don't know if it's the absolute worst, but Brooklyn and Atlanta were the most, listen, horrid conditions. Horrible staff, horrible joint, just vicious. And, you know, try to figure out why, but it was just Brooklyn and Atlanta, brutality. Your whole life can change there. So, you know, to make it out of Atlanta and Brooklyn, like when you were in Atlanta and they called your name to leave Atlanta to go to your institution, it was like you got a parole. It was like one of the happiest days of your whole life. You know, in Brooklyn the same way. When they're telling you to get out of Brooklyn. Although I did have a couple stints in Brooklyn where I met some guys from New York where I stayed there. And they were like, you know, tightened up down there. And we had a great little bid. But so when they took us from there and when they said, we're going straight to Berlin, New Hampshire. That was probably as happy as I was during coronavirus, to drive in a bus, handcuffed, shackled, and waist-chained for 16 hours, 17 hours. I was happy about that. And that's how crazy that was. But now when we get to Berlin and we're at the joint, I'm going to the camp. Everybody else is going to the medium. I'm the only person going to the camp on the bus. Now, they say, you gotta, stay in shoe. We're going to give you a whole block. There was only like 40, the bus holds 40, and you got to go to quarantine. And everybody got a test negative. And I was like, it's never going to happen. It don't happen. It can't. There's always 1, 2, 3 people that come up positive. Always. So now they keep us in there. Somebody tests positive. 2 people on the first thing. All right. You got 20 days. We're going to come back and test you in, I think it was 14 days. We'll come back and test you in 14 days. 14 days, you're ready to go, right? 2 people test positive. Now that's 28 days you're in this one block. Nothing. You're in a cell locked away. I'm on my own top tier because there's other people that are going to the medium. I can't be with them. My security level is too low. Okay? Now, they're getting ready to let us out. Okay, we're going to test you. We think everybody's all set. You guys should be all set. Then you see them come in with these suits on. I'm like, what the hell are they doing with the suit? Somebody tested positive on the bottom floor. Now another 13 days we got to wait. We're ready to go. The guy's ready to open the door. You know what kind of a mind fuck that is? It's brutality. That's what it is. And then when we finally did get out, I did finally obviously make it out. Berlin camp was amazing. There was only like 20 people there. Everybody got compassionate release. And I walked into probably one of the best situations I've ever been in prison. I'm getting emotional about it now because I just, I always say that you just have to if you hang on long enough, you're always going to make it to the other end. You're always going to, the blessing is always initially disguised as the curse. Coronavirus was a curse for me. A terrible, terrible curse. But when I ended up getting to the other side of it, it was one of the best places I've ever been at, the least populated. It was quiet. I was set up with everything over there. So it ended up turning into the worst thing. So I always think about that. I always, I say that you always have to just hang on, because I thought about, I was never going to end, and I should just kill myself. I'm seriously contemplating not even just existing anymore, because it's not going to get no better, and that's why, learning of what I learned through my life and through my experiences is that you just always hang on. Just always hang on, because you never know the blessing that you'll get if you don't. But the last episode will be the hip. That's going to be pretty funny. And it's pretty wild too. But that was coronavirus in jail. Terrible time. But we made it to the other side.